Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our special topic meeting. We're having a meeting this evening to discuss the budget, and I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. So can we move on to section 1.02 for the roll call? And Mrs. Widener, could you please do the roll call?
Yes. Mr. Dorr?
Here.
Mrs. Evans-Brockett?
Here.
Dr. Hallis?
Here.
Dr. Kohler?
Here.
Mrs. Lofton?
Here.
Mrs. Mayers?
Here.
Mrs. Roberts?
Here.
Dr. Weston?
Here.
Ms. White?
Here.
Thank you. All present.
Great, thank you very much, Mrs. Widener. Section 1.03, comments on any topic. Comments on any topic are accepted from the audience. Mrs. Widener, I did not see an email with any comments submitted for this meeting. I know I saw one with a comment that had been submitted, I believe, for a committee meeting a week or so ago. Was there anything else that was for this week?
I did not receive anything prior to the meeting. No comment.
We don't have anything for this meeting.
No.
Okay, all right. Okay, great. Well, I will just reiterate for our audience that comments can be submitted using the Q&A feature that's located at the bottom of the screen and will be read aloud at the subsequent section. And the instructions for providing comments are shown here in the section 1.03. So just for future reference, you can provide a comment in advance of the meeting or via email or during the meeting using the Q&A feature. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to section 2, the budget. And I will turn it over. We have our 2020-2021 budget update this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Weaver to present the budget.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Tonight is a step in the process as we move forward with the approval of our 2020-2021 general fund budget, as Mrs. Lofton has just stated. This is a necessary step. This is not the final step. So as we go through this process, we are at the proposed preliminary final budget presentation tonight. We need to have an approval tonight. And rest assured, we will continue to work on both the revenues and expenditures as we continue to move forward through final board approval of a budget for next year at the June 29th meeting. So we've gone back to the process that we've had in the past. I'm not going to spend much time on the revenues because we've been talking about the revenues and made some adjustments going back to March and early April, which have been shared at various finance updates and board presentations. So quickly heading into the revenues, you can see here that we've made several different adjustments throughout the presentation that we've previously shown. This is a summary of those sheets. And you can tell that obviously post-COVID, that impacted our revenues projections for 2021 to the tune of almost $4 million in various reductions. And also the moves that we've made, as conservative as we are in the business office, to reflect things like the state SB transportation and medical subsidy as well. So those are the totals of the previously discussed revenue changes. If we move to the next one, this is the summary slide of where we're at. I've kind of tried to highlight, carry forward the conversational piece that we had pre-COVID in the smaller black print, and then added some additional post-COVID impact notes for everybody to see. So if you're just joining this particular process now, at least you have a little bit of the history of the changes and development of the program and the budget program prior to COVID, and the reactions that we've had from a business perspective as well, and where a lot of those adjustments were. Total revenues tonight, $108,462,383. It is about 2.9% reduction from the 2019-2020 budget revenue. And that comes as no surprise, really, to those of us that participate in this or in our daily lives as we follow on the news. So moving forward, We have,
Mr. Weaver, can I, this is Sarah Evans Brockett. I just, in the PVSD email today, one of the articles shared was that the PA budget is poised to avoid education cuts. I guess on Tuesday, the budget bill passed through the House.
yes.
So are we looking at changing those state subsidies?
So that's one of my notes here to remind everybody that will watch them. As you mentioned, it did pass the House. It has not yet passed the Senate. And of course, it does not have the governor's signature on it yet either. But that is a very good point. And for tonight, we will not reflect that. We are sitting at 18-19 actual figures, which when we take the recommended, the 19-20 figures, and we're relatively sure that those numbers will be provided, and funding is in place for next year, then we'll reflect those for final June budget presentation. That was one of my notes. So yes, we are aware of that, and we have not reflected that yet. That will add about an additional $200 and some odd thousand, give or take. So yes, that is something we are looking at.
Great, thank you.
That was a good question. And
actually, to follow up on that too, Jim, I got an email from Tina Valletto today that the Senate passed a bill giving some COVID aid relief too that should be coming to schools. So it's apparently an even split with every district. So,
right. So good point. That's my second bullet point, is that we have not reflected any of those numbers yet for any kind of subsidy, the CARES subsidies or any of that stuff until it kind of gets vetted out. I'm really glad that we extended our normal preliminary budget and our final budget dates. While it's kind of a pain and we have to have a special meeting, this served us particularly well. Because if we would have had to have a preliminary budget approval and a normal time, which is the second Monday of the month, we would have had considerable upturn and questioning, which has now over the past couple of weeks kind of settled itself, and we have some direction now that we did not have then. So I'm very glad for that. And of course, then the reflective of that is that we now pass a budget later in June. So that gives us yet another 24, 25 days to get our act together and to get more information in. It would really help if they would, I understand also that the allocations for those relief monies will be coming forward, so we'll be able to see them. There is additional guidance on the CARES Act monies as well, which we're working our way through. And again, as we just talked about with Mrs. Evans Brockett, those funding terms, if the budget does get passed, then we'll have concrete information moving forward and make the adjustment for final budget approval. Again, another really good question, and you're taking 2 of my 3 points away for the revenues. Okay, so just a quick slide here on dependent revenue sources. We talk about alternative revenue sources. I know that we as a board and administration hit these hard. Many of those changes for COVID, post-COVID, are in here and react, whether it's the tax collection rate, which we've adjusted, the interim real estate taxes because the economy slows down, historically slowed down to a halt. So houses, additions aren't being built. Construction slows down. Earned income tax, we've talked about greatly. We've made adjustments and accommodations for that, as well as real estate transfer taxes and delinquent taxes as well. So just in those couple of line items there, you can see the bulk and the majority of those reductions show up in those. They're highly sensitive to the economy.
Mr. Weaver, can I ask you a question about that? So as I'm looking at this, I'm not seeing a change. So last year for our 18, 19, and 19, 20 budgets for our delinquent real estate taxes, I'm seeing that we budgeted $1.3 million. And for 2021, I'm seeing that you budgeted $1.2 million. And I would actually think that our delinquent real estate taxes might increase during a recession rather than go down. So I'm just curious why you actually lowered maybe I'm reading this backwards. Okay, so this is what's already delinquent that we think we're going to collect.
Correct.
Okay, so this is the percentage that we expect will be delinquent.
Correct. And
okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm realizing now that I'm reading this wrong, so my apologies.
No, that's good. And again, it was just meant to just show where the major impact happens there. Okay, so here is a snapshot of the local revenues. Again, you can see many of the negatives that impact there. Overall, almost a 4% drop in our local revenues. We know that 80% of our monies come from local sources. So that's where the bulk of this hit has become post-COVID. So moving on to the state monies, you can see there that we've tried to insulate ourselves the best that we can.
So I'm sorry, so just to back up though, so on this one, what percentage of, how are you estimating what percentage of taxes we think might be delinquent next year based on our local real estate taxes? Because it looks like we're still actually showing growth for, I imagine that would be reflected in the current real estate?
So yes, that's correct. It showed in the current real estate. And if you remember when we started our budget journey, so to speak, I had a 0.75% growth. Obviously that has now completely changed. But as we build our assessments actually did grow from July through February. And then the past couple of assessments, they've kind of become stagnant. But as we've talked about before, having 90% residential and a down economy isn't necessarily the worst thing. So our assessments have tended to be steady, as those previous slides showed from forecast 5. So we're relatively confident that the growth we've sustained from July through February will remain. It is small. It's a 0.13, because remember, part of that is also an offsetting real estate tax collection rate reduction from 96.7 to 96.5 as well. So that has a negative impact overall. We were well on track to meet that 0.75 growth before COVID. So right now, that's all kind of a mishmash of current real estate with a growth of actual growth of about a 0.3, and then an offsetting reduction in our real estate collection tax rate.
So you're saying that last year we collected 96.7% of local real estate taxes, is that correct?
Yeah, we were just shy of that, yes.
Okay. And we're thinking that the increase in delinquencies is only going to be 0.2%?
Yes.
Jim,
This-
also,
again-
this is Amy. The delinquent real estate had been trending down the last couple of years too. So
Right.
we haven't quite made the budget this year for delinquent real estate. So that's another reason, even before COVID, we reduced that number. So just as some backup.
Yes, which was a sign of a strong economy, right? I mean, we want our delinquents to go. We would prefer them to be 0, because that would mean everybody would be timely in their payments. And we did see that, as Mrs. Hurd said, that we did see a trend that our delinquent collections were going down because we had less every year that was going to delinquency. People were paying up on their bills.
So I would think it would be absolutely fantastic if our delinquency rate only adjusts by 0.2%. I'm just still not quite, I'm curious where that number came from.
That's just from experience that we've had. And the taxpayers pay their bills on time. And so we're blessed with that.
Okay.
So moving forward, then we have the state revenues. Again, as we talked about with the impact of COVID. And again, if you look at the 18-19 budget figures, those agree, the actuals now agree to what is currently in our budget for 2021. And you can see, for instance, if we go to 2019-2020 budget number, instantaneously, you can see the difference between a 6,443 and a 6,672 drives over $200,000 in adjustments that we will show if the Senate passes the budget that was proposed and approved by the House and the governor signs off on it. So again, we do have time for final budget approval to recognize those additional revenues, and we were planning to do so. Federal revenues, we have received no indication of any expected changes at this point in time. So we'll continue to do that. Remember, the bulk of that is made up of title monies, which are going to show a reduction in project access monies, which is the medical reimbursement program as well. There are some general notes that, just to bolster where we think we are for 2021 and why we are showing what we're showing. Okay, so moving along to expenditures. Obviously, here is the 10-year or 9-year cohort survival method enrollment. That gets put in November, and then we don't adjust it. That helps to guide our thinking moving forward. Again, it has been relatively accurate over the years, and it is predicting that we have a reduction of students of about 76 for next year. These next couple of slides just simply show the build of the expenditures when we first went live with the equal sign. And if here are the adjustments, this slide shows the adjustments as presented in tonight's presentation. After significant conversation and discussion over the past several committee meetings and finance updates and board meetings, we've kind of settled in on this listing of expenditures, and we have moved forward with removing these items from the proposed expenditures for tonight's presentation. All told, we reduced $3,273,106 from what was part of our pre-COVID expenditure figure. Those cuts are now reflected to help us shorten our gap between expected revenues and expected expenditures for 2021. So once we remove those expenditures, here is the summary spreadsheet of the expenditures and where they are. Again, you can see that overall, our expenditure budget for 1920 versus where it is tonight for 2021 with those cuts actually decreases by 0.06%. And each one of those individual major object line items is listed with the attention to detail. In the back, there's a slide that attempts to tell the story for each one of those major object codes. Here are some pre-COVID thoughts as we built our 2021 budget. And all of our reasoning is listed on there with areas of concern. And then here is the post-COVID impact. Some quick notes about the post-COVID impact. So overall, it's a budget-to-budget expenditure decrease. Salaries do go up by contracts and agreements, but they're offset by the recognition of the true-up costs and additional attritions and demotions that are listed on the reductions. However, just as a note, the net increase for salaries went up about $481,600. It's about a 1% net when you add in and take out the reductions. We do still have an STA contract increase at 2% for the 1920 budget, from the 1920 budget. North Montco tuition was driven by enrollment, and those figures were previously approved by the board. We have increase for the property tax rebate program because it's our first year, and what we did is we recognized the max into our budget. Remember that it's being shown as an expenditure and not as a contra to revenue. We have already shown that. We show a small increase for insurance purposes, and those numbers just came in and they agree with the preliminary numbers that the insurance broker provided way back in November. And of course, then the last piece to note is that we have an increase for the bond finalized from May 19th for next year, $94,668 increase in our total debt structure. Increases were offset by reductions, and so a total list of the reductions, $3,273,106, again, as a note, just in case anybody who can pick up the ball and see where we've been in our journey so far this year. The next 9 slides break down each of the individual line objects, major line objects. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because most of the black information has been listed. The red lists, for instance, a pre-COVID versus a post-COVID figure. So in this particular case, the 300 object code, it was going to be a 0.42% increase prior to the COVID incident once COVID happened, and we removed through various reductions that we had just briefly talked about. That shows that in the Object 300s overall, it is a 2% reduction budget year to budget year. So we started out with an increase. Once we remove the reductions, we end up with a reduction. Again, a lot of those figures in those slides maintain similar situation with just a printed, hey, this is where we were and this is why it changed. So when we get to that final figure, one piece that we previously did is we previously approved use of PSERS and debt service fund balance. So when we bring that all together on tonight's interactive presentation, again, this is the snapshot that we're working on at this particular point in time. We do have the live interactive ready to go should we choose to maneuver and suggest and look at some recommended changes. The total revenues as of tonight, 108,462, 364 or 384, sorry, it's awfully tiny. And the total expenditures, 112,467,097. And if you look at fund balance uses, both as approved and proposed, we are the approved were the PSERS reserve and debt service reserve, and the proposal is to use unassigned fund balance of $1.5 million, and also dip into what is projected to be something similar in name to a COVID reserve, but is essentially the 1920 operations, revenues, and expenditures, plus the recognition of what the shutdown savings are. When those three items come together as an amalgamation, we expect a little over $3 million to be available for us, placed onto our balance sheet as an audited figure as of June 30. We are recommending dipping into that and offsetting that by $821,000 to help us bring in a budget that is balanced by a 1.5% tax increase. Just a note, if we follow through with those fund balance reserves and committed and unassigned uses, that represents about 2.6% of our expenditure figure for 2021 as proposed tonight. So that's a quick way for us to say, wow, how much are we spending and what does that look like? A quick note is that anything more than 3% from a financial perspective would be challenging, to be honest with you. So 2.6% is below 3%. It's not zero. We know that we've learned that cash is king and we like to hold on as much as we can. But in order to do a balanced budget with a 1.5% tax increase, we can get there. So Dr. Russell, if you move to the next slide, here is where the rubber hits the road, where all of those numbers, if the 1.5 million in unassigned fund balance is approved, and if it is approved by the board to utilize the COVID reserve, again, whatever it's technically going to be called, that gets placed on the balance sheet as an offset balance to that, we can make it with a 1.5% tax increase. One other thing, if you will, Dr. Russell, back on that last slide, just for thought purposes as we move forward with tonight's conversation. If the board desires to go to a zero, we still must cut or recognize a use of somewhere else, $1,084,435 to get to a zero. Likewise, if we choose to go to a 1% tax increase, we still must cut or utilize reserves of $361,000, and so on and so forth. So our Act 1 index is 2.6. That is just listed there because that was our original goal just to get there in April. Obviously, when COVID happened, I kind of blew that out of the water, but that's just there for guiding purposes for a 2.6. So if we want to go to a 2.0, I'm not recommending that. We would actually put back $361,478 back into unassigned fund balance or back into that COVID reserve that we anticipate that will be there. given the 1.5% tax increase, the use of 1.5 million of unassigned fund balance, and the COVID offset, that the average homestead is valued at $180,000. That would increase our taxes by $91, again, on an average assessed home of $180,000. There's just an Act 1 note just showing how we come up with the Act 1 dollars. And the last line item, the last slide that I have, is just to remind everybody that we must approve this budget tonight in some way, shape, or form. We will continue to work on those items, much like the CARES Act. The state subsidies, once that passes the Senate and the governor signs it, or we have relative assuredness from those people in charge, professional organizations, that that's a real possibility. And also, don't forget, the state audit finding in our transportation, we're finalizing paperwork to send up there. That was a net adjustment and positive flow to the district of $280,000 as well. So once we get the paperwork up there, we will know relatively shortly if they will say that's going to come in 4 weeks, or that might not come for 6 months until we finalize some sort of process in the back. So those three items, those three cash items, the CARES monies or COVID monies in general, as Dr. Hallis pointed out, our budget being increased for state SB and special education SB back to 1920 figures, not 1819 figures like we currently have it. And the state audit finding net all would push positive revenues back into our 2021 budget. We're just not sure of those figures yet. So rather than get the hopes real high and have something fall apart, we're kind of hold those in reserves and talk about them over the next several weeks and determine as a group, as an administration and a board, we want to show those and reflect those. And then we can reduce the tax increase, or we can reduce what we're planning on using for fund balance reserves. The whole boat is open for the school board to discuss and change some of those things. So one other quick note, we have learned that the property tax recertification, we feel we are getting information that it looks like that won't be touched. So that was a real head shaker and a concern for us, as Dr. Russell shared in the memo, but it looks like that will not be touched. So that will be a non-issue as we move forward.
So, Mr. Weaver, backing up a slide, we're taking 800, I guess it's back up 2 slides, maybe a little more.
One more, yep.
Sorry, keep going. All right, hold on. Down.
There you go.
There it is. Okay.
Yes.
Proposal, so second line from the bottom, proposal to offset with COVID reserve. We've got $821,000 and some change there. What's our total COVID reserve? Can you remind me?
So right now it's roughly a little over $3 million.
Okay.
And remember, those are estimates and projections, but we're fairly confident of that $1 million at least.
Okay, and so some of that money would be what we use to address some of the costs that we might incur as we bring students back to school as well. We're going to sort of use it to offset if we have increased transportation or increased sanitation, or some of those additional costs might be allocated from the COVID fund. Is that the thinking for that?
Yes, absolutely. So
we would still have, I'm sorry, you said it's how many million in there?
It's about $3 million.
So after we have this, take this, we would have about 2.2 million.
That's correct.
Okay.
And again, from a thinking perspective, which Mrs. Lofton is exactly how we have to think about it, and have good debate about that. Do we want to, until the economy rebounds, do we want to split that into 4 and have a shot every year for 4 years until it goes to 0? Or the mere fact that these expenditures that we don't know we're going to have to do for guideline purposes, utilize that as well. Because remember, those are expenditures that we have not shown yet because we don't know quite what they are. So they would run as we would code them as a COVID expenditure. And then at the end of the year, next year, for instance, we would mash that all together and then utilize that COVID reserve to offset those expenditures that we can't predict at this point in time.
And then my other question is, I see that back at the beginning, you indicated that this was based on scenario number 2, in which we are attritioning one teacher position. I'm curious, if we did not attrition that position, and I don't know if you could speak to this or if Dr. Russell could speak to this, but how would that position be allocated in the district if we do not attrition it?
So right now we are considering the resources necessary to support social work counseling as well as BCPA behaviors of some of our students that are challenged by those things. So the positions right now that we're focused on strengthening are in those specialized areas. So it's very difficult to checkerboard throughout. So we would allocate in that way.
So and from a financial perspective, if we were to add, not attrition that position, we could calculate with the live interactive what that ad would be. And you could probably see that if we can do this right magically through technology.
So, I would be curious to see what that looks like. I mean, I am very concerned that assuming we do come back into the building, we are going to have some social and emotional issues that may be more intense than what we saw last year, perhaps. So, I'm curious how that would impact our changes. Or, the other thing that I'm curious about is, assuming we approve the budget without that position, not knowing what's going to happen in September. I'm assuming that if we do find that we're coming back in September, we could add that position out of the unassigned fund balance at sometime in August if we choose to, correct? So that would be an option to kind of hedge our bets a little bit.
Yes, correct. From a financial perspective, that's correct. Yes.
Okay.
But I do appreciate your thinking, Mrs. Lofton, because it's aligned to where we are as well, and in our predictions around what students will need as they return to school in the fall. It's about $100,000 different to add that position back in and not attrition it, roughly.
So yeah, I'm a little torn in that I feel like right now we're still very uncertain as to what we're going to be doing in September. And I don't necessarily want, but, well, I guess the other part of it is, how would those resources be deployed in a virtual environment? Would an individual who's working to address social and emotional and behavioral needs be able to be fully utilized in a virtual environment?
So I don't know that they would be able to be utilized in the ways that we're used to, but there is some teleconferencing that's happening. There's some tele-interacting that's happening. So it would be different for sure. However, it could provide a level of engagement that we may not otherwise have anymore. We have some questions about some of those types of resources moving into next year, and we can talk more about that. What the board can consider doing is keeping that attrition in the budget. You have another month for us to talk about it and consider the possibilities around resources before final budget approval. But that individual, we're using individuals that work with students in that way in a more versatile manner these days because we've been forced to do that in this environment. So that's what would be expected of a new social worker / counselor or a behavioral specialist, a certified behavioral person.
Mrs. Lofton, I appreciate your idea of kind of holding off on that hire to see whether or not we are coming back in the fall, because that's a position that really needs to forge a bond with the students and the families. So to start that virtually, I think could be a really difficult start to someone's employment, and I don't know that we'd get full utilization out of that position.
Well, that's certainly a fair point. So does anyone else have comments, questions, ideas, any other parts of this that you want to discuss before we move forward into the approval?
This is Kim Mears. I do have a question for BCBA. How would they, I think you both raised good points, how do they actually engage with students virtually? I would think that's pretty difficult, and I don't know. I'm just wondering, I guess, how you see that playing out, just in a broad sense, not too in the weeds.
Well, I'm gonna ask Dr. Boyd to respond to the BCBA piece. She did share with me that currently our social worker / counselors are providing some group counseling per IEPs and individual counseling. I think BCBAs also often work with teachers and professionally develop our teachers to support students with challenging behaviors, but I'll let Dr. Boyd chime in here and add to that.
Yeah, and again, when we return to the school year, if it's virtual, we will certainly have those conversations. Right now, during the school closure, the BCBAs are supporting teachers, and they are joining in with synchronous sessions with students to offer some supports as needed. A large part of their role is conducting functional behavior assessments, which is part of an evaluation process, which we know is not necessarily occurring right now during the closure. But when they can support students that they're aware of having needs, they are doing so at this time. It definitely does look different, but they are still supporting students and teachers in the way with which they can. That also sometimes means they're reaching out to families and talking with families, during the day, and offering supports from that aspect.
Okay, any other questions or concerns? If not, just
Judy, Mrs. Lofton, you're muted.
Sorry about that. There was a comment that came in through the Q&A that I'm going to go ahead and share now. It's from Dr. Amy Sachs, and her comment reads, regarding the counseling social worker position, although we might not be returning in the fall to the brick and mortar building, they will be vital if and when we return, which is still unknown if that will occur beyond August/September. Okay, so for whoever, another comment just popped up from anonymous viewer. So for public comments, you do need to state your name. And actually, if you can also indicate whether you work in a building or which municipality in the district you are a resident of, that would be helpful. So if the person who asked the second comment could share their name, we can share that publicly. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing that, so let's move on. And I can bring that up later if the person shares their name. Okay. So we'll move on to section 2.02. And the approval of proposed final general fund budget for 2020-2021. There is a motion to approve the proposed final general budget for 2020-2021. This rate represents an increase, and this would be 1.5%, correct?
correct.
Over the 2019-2020 tax rate. The public comment is request to approve the proposed final general budget for 2020-2021. This rate represents an increase of 1.5% over the 2019-2020 tax rate, and the real estate tax, and I don't, how many mils was that? That was
34.23.
actually, wait, in the slide presentation that I just pulled up, I'm reading 34.60.
Should be 34.23.
Okay. So, yeah, because I'm looking at slide 35. Was that not?
So Ms. Widener filled in 3423.
Oh, that's, I'm sorry, that was the estimated tax millage rate when we submitted this earlier in the year. That's just a driver that gets set in stone back in the fall.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so that's, oh, okay, so it's the one that's on slide 33 then.
Yes,
Okay.
my bad. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right, so real estate tax of 34.23, Act 511 wage tax of 1.4% to 1.65% with 0.9 to district, and that varies to municipalities, and real estate transfer tax of 1%, 0.5 to the district, and 0.5 to municipalities. Would somebody like to make the motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries. The preliminary budget is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weaver, for all of your hard work. I know there have been a lot of moving parts as we move through this process. So we'll move on to closing items. So 3.01 comes from the audience. So again, to our audience, you must share, you cannot comment anonymously. You need to share your name when you're providing a public comment. So if the person who commented anonymously wishes to share their name before the end of the meeting, I'm happy to read that. And then for seeing no other comments coming in, we'll move on to 3.02, comments from board members. So comments from board members are accepted on any topic. So I have a kind of a fun little comment. So I got my Viking mask, and I want to say kudos to our boys lacrosse team for sharing these as a fundraiser, and I will now be able to really my Viking pride as I keep my germs to myself. So I'm actually really kind of excited about my Viking mask. So thank you to our boys lacrosse team for organizing this.
Nice, nice.
That's great.
Looks good.
Yeah, they're actually awesome. They're pretty comfortable too.
Where did you see those, Judy? How can we get
Oh,
them?
somebody, it was posted, there's a PVSD parents Facebook page, and somebody posted, someone from the boys lacrosse boosters posted the order form there. Although I'm not sure if they're still taking orders, but it was maybe a week or two ago on the parents page. If you scroll back through that, you might be able to find the person.
Are they still available?
That's what, you know what, I don't know.
I'm looking out.
I'm not sure if they just got orders in based on the number of orders that they received, or if they ordered in bulk and have more coming out. So, but yeah, they come in different colors. There's a white one, there's a black one. They had some gators. They had some neat stuff. Oh, and I see, okay, a comment in our Q&A came in. Okay, so From Dave Sylvester in Skipback, the question came in, what is the status of FH Plan B? I assume that's Field Hockey Plan B. So, Dr. Russell, do you have information that you could share about where that stands as far as coming up with a Plan B for field hockey if we are able to have fall sports?
Yes, right now we have an agreement that's been arranged with the Proving Grounds in Conshohocken, and that will be presented to the board Monday night during the work session and discussed there. And Mr. Galansky has recently learned that there is a good chance the hockey team can return to the training center if necessary, and was expecting to get an agreement this week to verify that. So we may also be sharing that agreement with you. That's certainly one that's a little bit more appealing to the girls because of the drive, the difference in the drive. The drive to Conshohocken is not something we're comfortable with for our students every day after school. And right now the agreement doesn't take us beyond District 1 playoffs the first round. So considerations there, but I'm getting good news that there's real possibility we can get back into the training center, and hope to know for sure by Monday night at the work session.
Excellent, that's wonderful. And also one more comment came in, Lisa Sylvester and from Skipback, PA, and she notes that field hockey is selling the face masks and gaiters as well. So hopefully we'll see see that as a successful fundraiser for our field hockey team as well. So, Trish Renard from Perkins Township wrote, thank you for the wonderful job on the budget presentation. Okay. Okay, well, let's see, seeing and hearing no further comments, we'll go ahead and move to adjourn the meeting. Before I adjourn the meeting, I do want to announce that we will be having an executive session following the meeting for the purposes of legal, labor relations, and personnel.
Mrs. Lofton,
Oh, yes.
it's scheduled for 8 o'clock. Are we going to move that up, or are we going to still do it at the original time?
Dr. Russell, can we just get in there now? Will we be able to?
Yep.
Okay.
We'll go this one and go right into that one. Yep. We can do that.
Thank you for the question. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and have a fantastic evening. Good night.